Welcome to 3Con Commentaries. Now, you know, if you follow this channel even for a little while, that I love provocative takes. I love when people decide to jump out the window and say things that are a little out of the ordinary. So that's what this video is about today. One of the guys from Voices of Wrestling, which I don't follow and don't care about, decided to go on an absolute, he wrote an essay on Twitter about the Bloodline WWE story and how insecure wrestling fans are calling it cinema. And it's funny, but I want to have a conversation about this because of the explicit and implicit situations that are being said. So I'm going to go tweet by tweet. There is, I don't know, 8 of these things. This is going to be a long, oh God. Anyway, here's his opening statement. People are insecure that they have an emotional investment in the extremely lowbrow form of entertainment known as professional wrestling. So to justify it, they are trying desperately to claim that what they are watching is in fact not really pro wrestling. Guess what? That is incorrect. Most people do not think that way. Most people do not care if other people find themselves emotionally invested in professional wrestling. The idea that wrestling is extremely lowbrow. Now, I know that let's take a pause. That is true. Wrestling is considered a quote-unquote lowbrow form of entertainment, but here's what you must realize. In the United States, almost all of our culture comes from the bottom, not from the top. Now, I know in other societies, like in Rome and Greece, and I think England maybe, a lot of the culture comes from the top to the bottom, like the upper crust of society decides what's cool and what isn't, and what's nice and what's not. But in the United States, no, a lot of our culture comes from the bottom up. You know, it's people at the top monetizing what the people at the bottom already like. That's what's called mass entertainment. And pretty much anything that you watch on American television is going to be considered quote unquote lowbrow. Pretty much anything. From the type of TV shows we watch that are saturated with sex and violence to the kind of music we listen to that is saturated with sex and violence and simple drum beats. And we have people who are famous musicians, they can't play a cymbal, all right? And that is the nature of American culture, is that our stuff comes from the bottom, from people who don't have a lot. And we like to see morality tales played out either through sports or through our other artistic endeavors. So typically you'll see an American story, it will almost always be a morality tale. This is the same with pro wrestling. And the Bloodline story is a morality tale. I mean, it is what it is. It's got family wrapped up in it, but it's a morality tale. Is it lowbrow because wrestling is lowbrow? Sure. But that's American culture. His second tweet says, instead, it is more like acceptable form of dramatic entertainment, like a movie or a great dramatic TV series. The fact that the Bloodline stuff isn't really focused on matches, but in acting segments is a big plus. Okay, his third. So they act like what they are watching is cinema or whatever, and not a dumb, poorly acted form of theatrical entertainment. Here's the thing. Yes, it is. But so is, again, if you watch American television, which he probably has no experience with, a lot of it is dumb, poorly acted. I mean, for starters, where is this idea that actors are some kind of higher level of individual? Actors are scumbags. They play act for a living. The only difference between an actor and a wrestler is the physical elements of it, really. You know, a wrestler will physically throw themselves to the ground, will physically take a bump, while some actors will have a stunt double do it for them. But in reality, it's really the same thing. The major difference, of course, is a SAG card and the ability to go wear a suit in front and, you know, stand next to a guy like Billy Porter who wears a dress and, you know, have some kind of satellite going over his head or something like that. That's what makes people think that, you know, Hollywood is highbrow. When you really think about Hollywood, it's a barrel of scumbags, you know, pedophiles and other weirdos. You know, and wrestling is not that much different in that regard, but pedophiles, rapists, and other weirdos who take advantage of people. And a lot of their movies are terrible and poorly acted. And the content of said movies are just as lowbrow, quote unquote, as what you would see in the Bloodline story or any other wrestling story. Which is why, you know, I'm always surprised when wrestling fans are kind of disturbed by some of the things that Vince McMahon has brought on television, like necrophilia or anything else. Look at some Hollywood movies. You mean to tell me that Hollywood doesn't spend an hour and a half teaching you ridiculous things like you can fall in love with a volleyball, or that you can fall in love with a robot, or that there are robots out there to kill you or something like that? Like, there's all kinds of crazy stuff, sex cults and all sort of weird stuff that goes on in Hollywood, and it's fine. Nobody has a problem with it. It's considered high art, even though it's not. But what is high art anyway? We'll talk about that maybe a little bit later, but that was his third tweet, I believe. The fourth. The irony is that in the process of trying to claim what they are watching is not wrestling, but a superior form of art, they expose themselves as insecure dullards who only ever watch this dumb entertainment. And he continues in the next tweet, and know nothing of this alleged higher form of art that they claim the Bloodline transcends. All right, so wrestling is dumb. So what's smart entertainment? That's what I want to know. Because again, in the United States, pretty much everything we consume is considered lowbrow. Even if you think about rock bands, think about a rock band. What you see is guys with tattoos who probably come from middle-class households. They came from some kind of garage. They look weird. They're outside the norm. They believe in weird things. Sometimes they may even say crazy stuff that is outside of the norm of regular life. And that stuff is not considered highbrow. If you consider highbrow entertainment to be big set pieces of movies or the opera or Broadway or something like that, that stuff's not that big in the United States. WWE generally sells more tickets than operas and Broadway. I mean, it typically has a bigger profile in American culture than opera or Broadway. Again, United States, our culture comes from the bottom. It doesn't come from the top. Now, the top is where you make all the money, of course. Golf is a big sport amongst the wealthy. Ask the average person, even the average middle school or high school suburban kid, whether they care about golf. They don't. They watch mostly the same sports as kids in the hood and, poor trailer trash kids. Maybe when they get to like a certain middle age, like you ask a 40-year-old white man who's been, the president of a company for 22 years, if he cares more about golf or UFC or golf or pro wrestling, he'll probably say golf. But he's been in that tax bracket for a certain amount of time. And that becomes his cultural norm, is that he cares about things like golf, or what's that other sport where they run around with that stick? Lacrosse. They care more about that. But in typical United States, those kind of quote unquote highbrow entertainment, that stuff is for the birds. So usually we dumb that stuff down for the masses. Anyway, he continues. I don't think it's necessarily that people only watch wrestling and have limited pop culture consumption outside of wrestling. It's feeling insecure about having an emotional investment in wrestling. Okay, can you quote somebody who is feeling insecure about having an emotional investment in wrestling? Typically, what people are doing when they overanalyze wrestling, like what I do, for instance, is when I look at wrestling in terms of mythology and characters and all that kind of stuff, is you try to slot wrestling into similar pop cultural aspects like movies and comic books and video games, etc., because it does cross into all of those things too. There's been movies about pro wrestling, there's comic books about pro wrestling, there's video games about pro wrestling. So it makes sense to fit it in all of those graphics. And it follows a traditional American monomyth. If you actually look at it, usually it's some kind of rags to riches story, or some kind of man against the machine type of story, or a man who is an island against a faction of individuals, what the old outlaws and cowboys and Indians sort of story. Like, those things exist in pro wrestling, and people do have emotional investment in those narratives, regardless of where they come from, whether it's a video game or a comic book or a movie or a TV show. So the idea that people are insecure about liking wrestling, I don't think so. I don't think so. Who exactly? It would be nice if you could quote somebody who feels insecure. Like, a lot of people are closeted wrestling fans. That is a fact. Usually you'll see more celebrities and things like that pop out when wrestling gets a little bit more successful and get a little bit more pop cultural relevance. You'll see people who probably have not watched that often, or who watch, but they don't know that much about it. They'll talk about it. Like when Undertaker got beat at WrestleMania, Jon Stewart actually talked about it on The Daily Show. Like, it came out of nowhere that he just mentioned that The Undertaker lost at WrestleMania. Like, I didn't know he watched wrestling. And then here it is, he's talking about it on The Daily Show. You know, the outcome of a wrestling match. And pretty much it surprised his audience too. You know, but you see those sorts of things happen where people don't talk a lot about it because it is considered lowbrow entertainment. It's dumb. It's you know, all the things that this guy is writing in this think piece that he's scripting. But ultimately, it does appeal to people because you see it and WWE does a really good job of highlighting when people get caught watching wrestling, you know. You're like, okay, there are some people. I'm saying is this guy needs to find somebody who is quote unquote insecure about watching wrestling. I'm saying is I know that there is a casual audience out there who watches this stuff, but they don't obsessively tweet over it. They don't obsessively watch videos over it. They don't make videos about it. They watch it. They make watched clips or whatever, and then they move on about their day. They don't obsess over it. But those aren't the people who are calling the Bloodline cinema. Those are not those people. The people who are calling Bloodline cinema are basically trolling AEW fans due to the storyline that the Bloodline are putting out there. For starters, it's not even legit. Like I said, it's a troll mostly. Second, they're actually looking at some of the acting and some of the motivations of the characters and how, you know, the emotional beats, the ups and the downs of the storyline, and how it reminds them of if you watch a movie or a television show and the new episode, you know, introduces a new conflict, and then the characters react to that conflict, and then hopefully you get some kind of resolution to that conflict, and then the next week you'll see more, an addition on top of that. That's how TV shows are built. When people say they want episodic pro wrestling, that is what they're talking about. When Vince Russo is going on and on and on about episodic pro wrestling, that is what he's talking about. Introducing characters, introducing conflict, and then working that out in the episode. And then getting some people some type of string that they can follow for the next week, and then the next week, and then the next week. That's what they're talking about. Now, the whole thing about it being cinema, it's all a troll. But it being good episodic pro wrestling television, that is what it is. Now, no one is ever saying that this shit is Schindler's List. Nobody's saying that. Nobody's willing to put the Bloodline story on par with Casablanca. I haven't seen anybody say anything like that. So this guy is taking something that is really just kind of a fun thing that wrestling fans are doing and taking it to the extreme. You know, he's taking it very literally, which is not meant to. You know, sometimes you have to realize when you're just being, you know, somebody's just fucking with you. All right? It's that simple. His next tweet. So arguing that it transcends typical wrestling medium and instead feels, quote, like a movie or whatever makes them feel better about liking wrestling. Again, who exactly? His next tweet. I've always thought that what makes wrestling this cool and unique art form is that it's the cast of characters and personalities all thrown together in this world of mock athletic competition. So the art is part storytelling, part athletic performance. All right, at least you got that part correct. All right, so you figured that part out. He says, it doesn't have the best writing or the best acting or the best drama relative to more standard and traditional forms of entertainment. But the combination of storytelling, personality, and athleticism around this fake sport just makes it unique and unlike anything else. Okay, but the idea that wrestling has, you know, subpar acting and subpar writing is like, have you watched television lately? Like most television, 90, again, this is called, I think it's called the Pareto principle. 80% of all TV shows have terrible writing. The characters are stupid. They get involved with stupid conflicts and they work them out in stupid ways. And it really doesn't turn out very well. Even shows that people like the conflicts might be dumb, or they might be a recurring conflict that happens literally all the time. Something like Sanford and Son was considered lowbrow entertainment because it was for the masses. It was for black people to use crude language, and there was a lot of racial stuff in it. And the recurring theme was Fred Sanford he's always scheming, trying to make money. And so he will create a new scheme in a different episode of how he can make money. Once he wants to be a boxing promoter. For starters, he's a junk dealer. So he's going to go around collecting people's garbage, trying to clean it up, polish it, and resell it. That's his actual job. And he works for himself. So it's a little bit of a more of an American twist. I don't know about the Steptoe and Son, how it was in Europe. But the American twist on it, from what it seems like, is they put black people in it. So that was the American twist of it, that these people would be African Americans in, I think, Southern California, and they're trying to find a way to make their way in the world. And Fred's got these get rich quick schemes in his head all the time. Now, the writing for these episodes weren't always the best. The storytelling isn't always consistent in terms of, we don't know what happened to Lamont's mom. I think she died of cancer, but that was the show was on for so long, like The Simpsons. There's another show that's been on for so long that after a while it contradicts itself. That's what happens when you don't have consistent writing. Dragon Ball has been on for a long time. It starts to contradict itself. That's the nature of the beast when you have something that is successful and you keep trying to add to the lore and you keep trying to add to the writing or whatever. The actors aren't the best because the actors are supposed to somewhat relate to the characters that they're trying to portray. And then, of course, the medium matters. Wrestling is mostly televised in the United States. A TV show, characters act the way that character would act on a TV show. They wouldn't act the way that a person would act in a movie or in real life. So a lot of things are taken into account here, but at least you're right about wrestling being a unique mix of storytelling, athleticism, and art. So at least he got that part right. He says, quote, and this is the last one, "I don't have to lie to myself about and be like, this is a better form of dramatic entertainment than anything regular people watch, because I can articulate and understand what makes dopey pro wrestling appealing to me." So are you saying, so people who are saying the Bloodline is cinema, they're inarticulate and they have no real conception of real highbrow forms of entertainment? Look, for starters, a lot of people don't understand that pop culture by definition is dumb because it's for the masses. I've said that, I'm pretty sure I've said this already. If I haven't, I'm saying it now. Pop culture in general is dumb. All right? Because it's for the masses. It's for the old and the young. Primarily aimed at the young, which is why it's going to be somewhat dumb. It's the point of it is to play off of regular stereotypes, which could be a love song, which appeals to everybody because everybody has the human experience of falling in love, or a record about, I don't know, broken hearts, or a record about trying to find yourself in the world or whatever. But popular culture, by definition, appeals to the lower and the middle classes as much as it appeals to the upper crust, because everybody wants something that appeals to the human experience. This is, as a writer of anything, that's what you want to try to capture, is the human experience. Whether you're a poet, a wrestling booker, an author, a screenwriter, whatever, you're trying to capture the human experience and push it at some point within your story. Whether it's trying to humanize 4 mutant turtles and make it seem like these guys can really be brothers in a real situation, no different than you may have 4 actual brothers. That's kind of trying to mimic that relationship in the context of a comic book or a movie or whatever about these 4 damn turtles. It's dumb. It's about mutant turtles. It's stupid. But if you can pack in human experience into it and some action and some comedy and stuff like that, you can get people. You can make millions and millions of dollars off of that And guess what? It's a dumb story about 4 mutant turtles, something that is in no way realistic. Guess what? People don't care. Yes, back in the 80s, back when I was a kid, my mom was talking about this recently, and she saw the commercial for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. She was like, I can't believe this stuff is still going on. Like, I remember when when all my sons were little, how I was, running around the world trying to find these little green turtles, specific. And then when you get real specific, I want the one with the red bandana. I want the one with the blue bandana, and it was no different when she was trying to run around the world trying to find wrestling action figures. She didn't get it. She didn't understand it. But her way of consuming the same human securities was through soap operas. She watched the stories in the middle of the day. A lot of it was about love and a lot about betrayal and a lot about, this and that. And now you get that all on TV all the time, reality TV, and 90% human experiences. Who got who pregnant? Who's betraying who? Who's stabbing who in the back? Who's got beef with who? All that stuff is generally lowbrow entertainment because it doesn't really appeal to our higher moral selves. What are we loyal to? Are we loyal to our country or our people, or, is it about God or or honor or our land or our property or our rights or whatever? And any types of appeals to those anyway ends up really coming from the bottom. It doesn't really come from the top. And that's really what it boils down to, is that a lot of wrestling fans are trolling you when they start saying like the Bloodline is cinema. What they're saying is, this is a really good wrestling storyline that is predicated on the human experience. No different than a television show, no different than a movie. The acting is different, the writing is different, because all this stuff is going to be different. It's a different medium. But if you were to take the Bloodline angle and put it into Broadway, it would work just the same. You'll have to use different actors, of course, but it would work just the same. If you were to take it and put it in a novel, it would work just the same, because it's based off of basic human experience of 4 people who grew up together. One of them is sort of the chosen one, and the other 3 are just kind of like his goons who he's been using to maintain his authority. But then it becomes sort of a rebellion about how you mistreat people enough and they start to rebel against you, which could be any group of people, but it takes on a different level when it's family. Okay. So it's a different level because people put their families typically above any other social group that they may be a part of. And so considering it's wrestling and they're really family and everybody knows that they're all really related, it takes on a different element of truth to it. It's beyond kayfabe at that point, because none of these people are lying about who they are. They are cousins. That is his cousin. That is his brother. This is a situation. It is that Roman Reigns was in this position before the Usos. It was that he was pushed before they were. It was that Roman Reigns was treated as the golden child in this situation. And the Usos were basically just 2 guys that were his cousins that were on the roster at some point. And he did lift them up. And was the reason why they were pushed as the main event. So a lot of this stuff is you're trying to find the kayfabe in all of this. And it's difficult to do so because a lot of this stuff is true. So that makes it a different level of storytelling than the actual active wrestling story. Different from the NWO. Okay? Those guys were not real invaders into WCW. All of them had WCW contracts. Sorry to break that kayfabe for you, but all of them were under a WCW contract. It was a storyline that they were working. The Usos and Roman Reigns are legitimately related. All right? They would be related even if they weren't under WWE contract. So it takes on a different meta level. So people are taking that into account when they're evaluating the story, that these people are really related. When you look at the booking of Roman Reigns and the booking of the Usos over the last decade, it is true that Roman was treated as the golden child. So of course it went to his head. Of course he would use his political authority to lift his cousins up, because who wouldn't? All of this sort of stuff is taken into account. It's not that they're ashamed of being a wrestling fan. That's ridiculous. What they're doing is saying, while you guys are doing a bunch of hokey flips and fake fights, our guys are over here playing out a real life morality tale in front of the television, in front of everybody. That makes their matches bigger, even if they do less in the match. Let fewer moves, the matches is longer, is more dramatic. But you guys are doing flippity doodads and hitting each other in the face and bleeding all over the place, and you're still drawing less money than our guys over here who is trying to do movies and acting, etc. But it's also been, and I think I should close with this, and it's something that is true, that part of the seed, the bedrock of this argument comes from Vince McMahon himself, who has always tried to move wrestling past wrestling, right? It's always been Vince wants to be in television. He wants to be seen as being a TV mogul, not necessarily a wrestling promoter. It was his desire to go beyond wrestling. But his desire to go beyond wrestling and into pop culture and all of this stuff was predicated off the fact that wrestling is considered lowbrow entertainment. And the way that it was regulated as lowbrow entertainment, the way that it's treated by advertisers as lowbrow entertainment, that's what he was trying to escape. Yes, he dabbled into other industries, but so did a bunch of other people. There were tons of promoters who had restaurants or invested in movie theaters or whatever the hell, because as a businessman, that's what you do. You try to diversify your business ventures as much as possible. You're going to invest in a lot of different things. People like, I think Jerry Jarrett invested in a construction company at one point. Are we saying that, he hated being a wrestling promoter because at one point he stepped out and was trying to get into construction? What about when, Eddie Graham is investing in restaurants and things like this? He hates wrestling. He's trying to move into restaurants. It's like, no, they're trying to broaden their horizons. It's like, okay, you're successful here, but can I be successful somewhere else too? And Vince always had that sort of mentality, which is a general mentality of successful people. It's not just he's a scumbag wrestling promoter who doesn't want to be a scumbag wrestling promoter. It's like everybody before him who was successful in an industry moved on to a different industry once you get to a certain level. Everybody. You can't try to find an entrepreneur that got rich doing one thing and decided, I'm just going to do this one thing. Try to find one. There's not going to be many. Okay, most of them are going to move on to something else eventually. But that's where this idea kind of comes from. This is sort of the bedrock of this argument, is that Vince McMahon is insecure about being a wrestling promoter. He wants to be in Hollywood. He wants to do movies. He wants to do this. He wants to do that. They had WWE Studios and WWE Hollywood, the restaurant, and all this kind of New York. The restaurant, yada, yada, yada. It's like he was trying to expand the brand. Once you have reached a certain level of success, you try expanding. Try expanding into vitamins and IcoPro and all that kind of crap. It didn't work. You try to expand into bodybuilding. That didn't work. You try to expand into movies. Moderate success. It really didn't work. Try to expand into football. That certainly didn't work. But it's what you do when you get a certain level of success. Just like if you become a senator, all of a sudden you might see, can I become the president? Is it that all of a sudden you are insecure about being a senator? It's like, no, being a senator is great if you can get the job. But if you can become senator, you might be able to become president too. And people are thinking about that. If you're ambitious, you're always looking for new worlds to conquer. You're always looking for new things to get into. So if you were to say that people are insecure, quote unquote, about being wrestling fans, that's where your idea of it is going to come from. Is this coming from Vince? Vince is going to be the guy who's insecure about being a wrestling promoter. And he says, we make movies, pal. It's a troll Clearly, they don't make movies. And when they literally were making movies, they literally were not good movies. They literally were shitty movies. That's why, WWE Studios has died. But they still managed to create television products that made money. Total Divas, Total Bellas, Ms. and Mrs., all that kind of stuff. All that came from WWE Studios. Now, all their movies failed because they weren't any good. But that doesn't mean that all of the attempts to broaden the fan base has failed. Because you have reality TV, which was a genre that we saw expanded hip hop. We saw it expand other mediums, pop culture, and Vince jumped on that and used it to expand the wrestling product. Now that brings in the Diva Stans, who are basically a parasitical organism on the wrestling fandom. But it expanded, it opened people up to pro wrestling. And it opened up pro wrestling to other forms of entertainment. And it opened up pro wrestlers to other mediums in terms of entertainment. And it created people who now exist in pop culture, like the Bella Twins, whether for better or worse. They exist in pop culture now, and they can go out and do other things like podcasting and movies and television, etc., which is the goal, which is the point. The WWE has always saw wrestlers going into movies. Well, Vince Jr., let's say, has always saw wrestlers going into movies and then coming back and all that kind of stuff as a positive for the product. His dad didn't, which is why his dad didn't want Hulk Hogan to do Rocky. All right. But Vince Jr. saw it as a positive. If you go out and become famous over there and then come back here, you can increase our stock. You can be a bigger draw. You can be a bigger star. So that's why they always push that expanding the brand stuff, which is why all of this, it's cinema. It comes from people who understand that WWE's goal is to get a star to a certain point on the roster. Roman Reigns is at that point right now. And then push him into Hollywood. And then hopefully he'll retire or whatever. He'll go out, become a big star in Hollywood, and then when he comes back, he can increase the audience. That's where all of this stuff is coming from. But since this person is supposed to be articulate and supposed to know this, you think that they would figure that out on their own. But apparently they don't. On second thought, no. We're going to look at the responses to this thing. Let's watch this Voices of Wrestling dork get ripped apart, because this ought to be fun. So I did my part of trying to argue against this mess. Let's see what everybody else who woke up this morning and saw this shit on their timeline and decided, you know what, I'm tired of these dorks going online and trying to belittle my beloved Bloodline story. Somebody says, the wrestling I enjoy is Kino, and this entire thread is pointless. There's a boo this man gif. Low form of entertainment, but on a global scale, is probably the biggest and popular form of entertainment. People really underestimate how popular pro wrestling is. This is true, but pro wrestling is cultural. It's big in Mexico, but they do it differently. It's big in Japan, but they do it differently. So WWE is global in so much as they can go anywhere and draw money and travel, but they don't produce the same kind of pro wrestling that Mexicans really, really love, or that the Japanese really, really love, or that even Europeans really, really love. Is a WWE, WWF in general is a uniquely American style of pro wrestling. Very unique. Here's another one. This is the second essay I've seen about how people liking the Bloodline hurt their feelings. I wish I could find the first one. Here's another one. Just say that wrestling shouldn't have any storytelling to it. You say people are insecure about wrestling, yet you go on a whole ass rant, shitting on others for being entertained. Take the L and move on. That gets a heart from me. I like that. Take that L, baby. Another one. It's really not that deep enough to create a thread like this, but you're a certified level 1 dork, so this isn't all that surprising. Please feel the touch of a vagina. Oh, goodness. Here's another one. You didn't have to write that long-ass essay. We know you just don't like the Bloodline. This is what he said about a sold out MSG show, bro's not accepting that he's a draw. So apparently, this person who wrote this essay went on a WrestleNomics podcast to argue that Roman Reigns is not a draw because the MSG show that Roman Reigns just sold out would not be considered a sellout under Bruno Sammartino, which would have been in the 1960s, 70s, where they had, smaller stages and stuff like that, which is what I'm surprised to hear Brandon Thurston actually tell him, like, hey, Roman needs to have a long ramp to walk down and all this kind of stuff. If that's that guy, and I don't know that it is or it isn't, I am floored that he would be so dumb as to not understand. Because I think Brandon told him like 12,000 tickets they moved, when Roman was announced for MSG or something like that. I think 18,000 ended up being the final tally. I don't know. Look, I'm not going to get into that. But just the guy hates the bloodline is funny to me. Here's another one. Point of view, you've never felt the touch of a woman. This one is, I think, in Spanish. Vous t'entraide, c'est toi, le insecure mon coco. Translated to, seeing your thread, you are insecure, my coco. Whatever that means. My coco. I guess my cuz, my friend. Here's another one. You people are really annoying. Here's another one. Who hurt you, bro? This one's pretty funny. I read it in my head, and go get you some bitches and make your life worth living. Oh, goodness. Here's another one. Just one day without someone crying about others' perspective, please. Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Why are people so offended that wrestling fans are enjoying wrestling? Well, because usually the bloodline they take up 20% of the show. And they're not wrestling, but whatever. Here is another one. This is the most sad and pathetic thread I've seen in my life. You're a weirdo for being this rattled by people calling the bloodline story cinema. Yeah, he is. Here's another one. Do you always hate when people have fun or ... question mark? Here's somebody else. Coming from someone who just genuinely didn't understand the appeal before my boyfriend then helped me understand why it's so popular. We started watching live at the Elimination Chamber and have been watching ever since. Sometimes you just need someone willing to answer every question you have in order to get invested. And hey, the first thing that drew me in was the whole bloodline, because this is way more than wrestling. I feel like I'm watching a drama, and now I have more interest in other superstars like LA Knight. Anyways, L opinion, stay mad. Oof. This nerd really wrote a novel on twitter.com because he's triggered by people calling a wrestling storyline cinema. The absolute state of wrestling bloggers. Ooh, yes. Voices of Wrestling is a blog, isn't it? Ooh, yikes. Moving on. Not to be a dick, but this is entirely too long of a thread of you just being a hater. You lost me after the first tweet, and no one is reading all of that, sir. Well, unfortunately, I did. But then again, I'll wait for the rain to stop so I can go to the grocery store. So I had a couple of minutes. So I'll always find a way to squeeze a video in. Here's another one. I don't think I've ever read something so incorrect on that many levels. Truly an embarrassing take. Yes, absolutely. Here's another one. I think you've taken this a bit too seriously, mate. I don't see insecurity when people call the Bloodline segment cinema. I'm just seeing people enjoying what they're seeing. The insecurity I see is from people trying to discredit, diminish, and stomp on the enjoyment of others. Ooh, yeah. Whew. This is a dumbass take. I'm going to be real with you, Chief. Here's another one. Elitist Exhibit B. People, quote, people enjoy something I don't. Oh, the insecure peasants who don't understand the complexities of highbrow TV. And I gotta reread it. He says, Elitist Exhibit B. Quote, people enjoy something I don't. Oh, the insecure peasants who don't understand the complexity of highbrow TV shows and movies that I consume. Oof. Oh my goodness. Here's another one. This one's actually coming from a surprising source. This is an AEW fan. It is not that serious. This is one of the most stupidest discourses that I've ever seen on wrestling Twitter. Professional wrestling is just like a TV show and a movie. You said it yourself. And stop taking things literally. When people use the word cinema, they just mean that they really liked what happened on their screens. That doesn't mean they don't know it's still professional wrestling. It's just an expression of appreciation. Yeah, that's a really good point. Really, really, really good point. Here's another one. Stop scaring away the hoes, please. Holy shit. Somebody says, maybe calling it cinema is a bit, and you wasted your morning dissecting something without understanding its origin. Yes, it's a troll. You don't get it. Here's another one. Pro wrestling is an extremely cool form of lowbrow entertainment, and when taken intellectually seriously, should be taken on its own terms. That is true. This is from a wrestling historian. This is why so many people who were fans back in the day cling to the notion that, quote, everybody knew it was fake. It perhaps made them feel better about enjoying lowbrow schlock. Wow. He says, I'm mostly referring to smart fans of that era, so that wouldn't apply to people today. He says it was how they unjustified enjoying something they knew was more a performance than competition by claiming everybody else did, which was generally not true, though it could vary at one time or place. So some would throw in some snide comments calling it a performance or something like that. Those who believed they were not going to be swayed by the comments of a local sports writer. It's interesting. Here's another one. Great thread, but maybe it's just generational. Maybe kids talk this way, and WWE is generating interest among kids that grown-ups parent because they need to speak to the kids. I don't understand that. No, a lot of people who are calling the Bloodline cinema most of them are not older. You know, they're not my age group. They're usually people younger than me, so I'll probably say something in the neighborhood of 25 to 30. You know, and they're basically using it because Scorsese used it. And they use it for other things too, not just pro wrestling. They use it for, you know, when people get into beefs on television and somebody gets knocked out or something like that, they may say this is cinema, you know, because it was a moral told in the tale, you know, the fuck around, find out principle. Anyway, here's another tweet. Another variant on this insecurity is the fantasy booker / rating obsessive bent. I am not a smart, simply enjoying this TV show. I am an analyst of the business. That is also true. And I think a lot of people fall into that whole variation as well. People who they claim they don't enjoy anything, but they watch it obsessively and talk about ratings obsessively and talk about attendance obsessively. It's like, okay, if you're following every metric of the goddamn business, you're a fan of the business, okay? Like, I watch movies, but I don't really care how much movies make. I don't care how many people went and saw it, you know, but if it comes up in a topic of conversation, it would be nice to know, but that would be about it. And I really don't care about what the attendance is for wrestling shows or what the ratings are for wrestling shows. Like, I only talk about ratings when there is something of a big deal being made about it. Like, if somebody makes a big deal about a rating, I'll look into it and try to see what the big deal was. And maybe there's some kind of cultural explanation for why it was so far up or was so far down or whatever. But generally, most shows hover around the same rating, period, you know. And sudden horrific drops or skyrocketing rises do need to be explained. And as a person who watches pro wrestling and follows the product, I want to be able to explain, or at least have some idea, why the ratings suddenly dropped out of nowhere or suddenly skyrocketed out of nowhere. So here's another one. It spends its time jerking off intellectually to a 24-hour wrestling, but explains to you that it's the WWE fans who force it. Ooh, yikes. Oof. Jerking off. That's gross. This also describes the types who rave about how real matches look and how serious promos are. It's simply an insecure justification for enjoying what is essentially a carnival act framed inside of an absurdist soap opera. This is false. The idea that wrestling comes from a carnival, they don't really understand that wrestling was not just like created as part of a carnival. That's just something that it's really weird that people do that. Like, if you're going to use wrestling's history against it, at least tell the truth. The carnival aspect of it came after the legitimate sports element of it, Like, it started out as a legitimate fucking sport, all right? And then once these guys realized that getting hurt sucks, that, wrestling for 2 hours just for everybody, including the referee, to collapse and for the people to walk away without caring who the hell won, didn't make them any money, it became more of a performance, But it's far from the carnival roots, So this is one of those things now where I don't even think the carnival aspect of it even applies anymore. I mean, they do bring out the freak shows. They still do that. Guys like Omos or Lars Sullivan, who are obsessively large or especially ugly, or they can do weird things like puke on command, or, weird stuff like that. They still do bring in those elements to try to create an attraction. But largely I would think the carnival aspects of wrestling, it kind of moved beyond that. Back to people roasting this guy. You are actually a fucking geek, bruh. Absolutely. He's overthinking it. There's a lot of overthinking about this whole thing, especially internet culture, which I didn't talk about in my 30-minute rant on this subject. I didn't talk about that the whole cinema concept is just internet culture. People call everything cinema these days. But let's get this one in. People wanted WWE to do long-term storytelling. WWE has finally done that. And a large group of people are enjoying it. A byproduct of that has been people trying to tear down those fans for enjoying what they watch by insinuating those fans are dumb. These are sad people, man. Oh boy. Here's another one. It's better than the trash comic movies that true cinema fans have disdained for a long time. So maybe, in fact, it is better than modern cinematic offerings. Also, it's how kids speak. And I'm not going to use the guy's name. He says, "You are too young to get off my lawn, these kids, trying to make your hobby look cool." I agree. The weird thing is I saw somebody make this, and I'm going to close on this. I don't want to keep reading this stuff. We would be here all day. But somebody said that there are people who actually like those CW television shows. And that, I think, is the best the best way to end this thing, is that just because something is, in your view, poorly written or poorly acted, doesn't mean that it still doesn't have a substantial fan base. Now, CW, they had years and years and years of television shows. Every one that I saw looked cheesy, bad CGI, terrible acting, terrible actors, and didn't really relate to the comic book characters that I've already known. Whether they brought in diversity characters, or they race swapped the character, or they created some kind of composite character out of two smaller tier characters, or whatever the case may be. There's tons of shows that should not have been made because they looked like shit. And there's movies currently being released that look like shit and probably should never have been made. But that's the nature of the beast, in creating content, the content is going to vary in quality. Some people are better actors than others. The writers are better than others, and et cetera, et cetera. But the Bloodline has had a coherent story. It's been a pretty consistent story. and people are enjoying it. I enjoy it, even if I think they may do a little too much sometimes. Even though I think the actors might be a little over the top sometimes. That's just the nature of pro wrestling. So to me, people are just enjoying a storyline based off of what it is in the depths of the storyline. And that's it. The whole thing about it being cinema is you overthinking it. But when you look at the United States in general, most of our culture is lowbrow entertainment because we're not really all that interested in higher brow entertainment. People will watch a science fiction TV show, but trying to get them to read a science fiction novel, you can forget it. Like Game of Thrones, a TV show, is not highbrow entertainment because it's a TV show. Remember, they used to call it TV the idiot box, right? They used to say that only, lower quality people watch television. Real people went to the theater. Real people read novels. They went to the opera. But in America, we brushed that to the side. Barely anybody does those things anymore. Those things may make money, and because they're good for outings and because rich people like to do it. But generally speaking, Game of Thrones is lowbrow entertainment by virtue of it being on television. Anything that is on television is going to be considered lowbrow entertainment, especially when you consider the history of television. So you want to talk about the carnival history of pro wrestling. Let's talk about how the elitists hated television. They hated the radios too. Anything that is for mass consumption, the elitists don't like it. So understand that when people are going on about how wrestling is lowbrow and all that kind of shit, it's because it's on television. Most things that are on television are considered lowbrow, period. And Americans, we love our lowbrow culture because that's who most of us are. It's a good reflection of who we are for the most part. And that's really all there is to it. So you're overthinking it. Like, share, subscribe. This time I am done, and I will talk to you guys later.